The Well'S Vow. The summer the water left, the town learned how many sounds were made by thirst. Doors settled without slamming. Even the highway seemed to lower its voice. People watered tomatoes with coffee gone cold. Everyone counted ice. The town's throat never cleared in the heat. Ruth Vale counted more than most because counting was her habit. In the library's back room, where the fan only pushed heat from one corner to another, and the paste of old bindings smelled like a grammar lesson, she kept the town in tidy drawers. Births, deaths, church suppers. The winter the school furnace died. The spring a tornado lifted only the billboard that promised a lake we never went to. She kept a drawer for small things that never become news, but make a place itself. By the second week of July, the reservoir lay like an empty plate, with a ring of scum, the only water left to admire. The laundromat went to 3 days a week. County trucks came with pallets of gallon jugs. Children kicked the empties along Main, a hollow sound. Ruth wrote it down, tracing the decline with a pencil she kept sharpened with a knife because the sharpeners were gone. A rumor arrived the way rumors do when people are ready to breathe them in. 2 women passing in the dark said the old Bower well had come up full. It was a circle of stone and a wooden lid at the end of Bower Street, past a fence sagging under grapevines that never set fruit. When Ruth was a child, there had been talk of snakes and old business, said with a lowered voice. Over the years, the well had become a shadow we stepped around. It mattered now because everything else had failed. Even those who laughed at miracle stories were standing at kitchen sinks as if listening might draw water from dry pipe. A forgotten circle of stone felt suddenly like an apology from the ground. Ruth walked out at noon the next day. The meadow crackled. Cicadas buzzed like a socket with a loose plug. She found the fence down and the lid slid aside. A knot of neighbors stood around the mouth, cautious and curious with a touch of shame, like parishioners waiting to see whether a statue would weep. Someone had slung a new rope over the crossbeam and tied on a galvanized bucket. Ruth peered into the dark and saw a circle that reflected more than light. Water. Not the tea-colored stain of seepage, not the black glass of a sump, but water with presence, the kind that makes your throat open just by looking. No one moved at first. Then Marion Phelps, who had once fainted in the pharmacy and apologized for years as if embarrassment were a bill paid by installments, tied the rope around her forearm and lowered the bucket. The pulley squealed. The rope went light, then heavy. Marion hauled, grunting with shoulders that remembered work. The bucket rose under a halo of droplets. It sloshed when it hit the stone and made a smell that lifted every face a fraction, the way a cool wind lifts laundry on a line. There were cups. There are always cups somewhere. Marion produced a dented tin cup from nowhere and dipped and drank. She closed her eyes, swallowed again, and the second swallow sounded like mercy. Her face changed in a way Ruth could not name. No younger, no brighter, only as if a film only Marion had felt had been washed off. She set the cup on the lip and pressed a finger to her mouth. The gesture moved like the first tremor. Hush. Don't bring paper or pipes. Don't involve the county or the state. Ruth went home and wrote 3 lines in her notebook and crossed them out. In the morning, 3 cards in the drawer were white, not erased, not faded. White, as if ink had never existed there. The card about the grocery's failed freezer, the one about the marching band's missing drum major, the one about the dog that came home with a wreath around its neck. She touched the whiteness and felt a moving away in her head. Water hours appeared in the mayor's careful hand on plywood wired to the fence, 8 to 8. Lines formed and held without grumbling. A child sat cross-legged and pushed a bead along a shoelace, making a game of going nowhere. When people drank, a small change passed over their features that had nothing to do with temperature. That night the well gave back its first things. A thin ring surfaced and lay on the stone, bright as a pull tab, a safety pin, a girl's ribbon that uncurled along the lip. In the morning, there was a cracked pair of glasses and a charm bracelet with 2 charms missing. Ruth put them in a cardboard box at the library and labeled it "Lost and Found." People found what they did not know they were missing until they touched it and felt a small ache open like a drawer. Ruth held out until the 4th day before she carried a clean jar to the well, filled it, and drank. The water was cold in a way that made July seem like a mistake, sweet only as water honestly is, with a faint metallic edge like the taste of a spoon. Peace came, along with the sound of a page turning. Back at the library, the card about the tornado that lifted the billboard had gone white. She had not forgotten the storm. The paper had forgotten the ink. From then on, she counted the white cards morning and night, marking the number in the calendar's margin with a thin line that looked like a scar. The whiteness did not spread evenly. It took small stories first, then smudged a name, then blurred a face. When Ruth told Father John, he said a quiet thing about wages and silence. The mayor stood by the fence at the well with a signboard smile and said they would keep it civil, and Ruth understood him to mean that the town had made a trade it did not want to describe. On the 7th night, the well gave back a baby sock, striped at the cuff, blue as a promise. The clean of it was wrong, the brown thumbprint on the sole was not. Ruth held it in her palm and put it in the box without a card. At home, she spread the photographs of her son on the kitchen table and studied them like a scholar, hunting for a thesis in footnotes. In one, he sat on a picnic blanket, howling at a world that would not arrange itself, the twin of the sock on his kicking foot. Somewhere in those days, Agnes, for whom the hottest summer in memory was an errand, who carried water to neighbors after dark because her shoulders knew the weight, went to the well and did not come home when she said she would. In a normal week, 3 houses would have asked by morning. This week, Ruth caught herself before the name left her mouth and stood smiling like a stranger. Ruth watched the objects pile, the town's talk thin and the drawer bleach, and she did something the town would have called unneighborly if the word had had a place to land. She drove 2 counties over and bought a hand pump meant for a shallow farm well, all iron and promise. She wheeled it into the meadow after midnight. The handle blistered her palm. She kept the headlamp off because a circle of light felt like bait. When she worked the handle, the well answered like an old joint. Water came not in the generous rush of the bucket but in gasps and then a steady throat clearing. It ran from the spout and darkened the grass in a tear-shaped stain. Then Ruth unbolted the spout and turned it, and what had been coming up went down with a long, obedient swallow. She pumped until her shoulders burned. At dawn, the surface lay lower by 2 hand widths. The insects raised their volume as if to replace the sound of what she had taken. She came back the next night and the next. The handle grew heavier. In the drawer, whiteness multiplied until Ruth stopped counting. Father John once stood at the fence and did not speak. The mayor nodded a nothing past her. The hush held. On the 3rd night, the handle locked. Ruth pressed with both palms, then with her shoulder. The iron held. The silence collected around her like sweat. She said aloud what she had vowed not to give language: "I want him back." The words were not a prayer, but a measurement. They hung between her and the circle of stone like a bead of water caught on a lip. The well sighed. A slow, wet breath rose, smelling of iron and cellar and the inside of a winter coat put away damp. From the dark came the soft bump of something rising. A backpack tipped against the lip and would have slid if Ruth hadn't caught it. Canvas, one strap repaired with ugly thread, a cartoon dolphin peeling, a zipper with a missing tooth. Water ran down her forearms and into her shirt, and she did not feel the wet, only the weight. She did not open it at once. When she did, the sound of the zipper was wrong, like a note struck on a sick piano. Inside, notebooks remained legible. A math page with a smudged 7 held a proud check. A juvenile non-fiction book about birds breathed out the library's dust. In the pouch, a bus pass's corner showed tooth marks, The things were not ruined. That was the worst part. They had been preserved as if time had been tender. Ruth carried the backpack to the library and set it on the desk. In the morning, the mayor came with his careful face. He wanted to talk about order and hours and how the presence of the objects was unsettling people. There had been a scuffle when two men reached for the same mug and neither could say why he wanted it. The town had been quiet and was getting loud again, and maybe loudness would turn the water mean. He did not say miracle. He did not say cost. He had learned not to bring language to the well. By noon, a rumor walked Maine that the library was hoarding. By afternoon, a knot of neighbors collected at the door with empty jugs and full unease. They looked like a jury without a judge. Ruth set the backpack on the counter and did not lift it higher. A woman reached and snatched her hand back as if a fence had always been there. A man said, "This is wrong," and did not say how. Ruth took the pack to the back room, locked the door, and sat on the floor with her hands on it until they cooled. That evening she wheeled the pump to the well before dark and did not pretend she was hiding. People watched from porches with the interest you give a woman carrying an empty cage. Father John stood at the far side of the field with his collar unbuttoned and his hands in his pockets and did not move. Ruth worked the handle. The last smooth sheet became a smear. Stones showed their shapes like old teeth. When the pump seized and the handle came up dead, the silence that followed was not the hush of the first day. It was the pause after a machine stops and all the other quiets rise to fill its place. Across the meadow, someone fell to his knees, remembering. The town went dry again. The hoses, the welcome wet rings, the cool undertrees, and it went wet with other things. Arguments resumed and sharpened. A man drove his truck to another man's driveway and said the sentence with blood and lumber in it, and then shut his mouth and went home and wrote the check he should have written in April. A woman put a casserole on a porch and told the giver not to come back. Sirens returned to their proper business and left again. Ruth set the box from the library steps in the morning sun. People slowed and lifted objects like birds from snares. Marion came for the ring from the first night and put it on, though it turned her finger green. Two brothers reclaimed a joke trophy and were careful with it in a way that did not make room for laughter. Ruth walked to the Phelpses and held up the backpack and watched Marion's face change in a way that hurt to see and healed something too. Like a bone set right with a sound you don't forget. Storms came, a half-inch in the gauge, then another, then a soaking. County trucks returned with blunt jugs. Lawns turned a modest green. The laundromat went back to 5 days. There was fury in pockets like unspent fireworks, and there was repair, the patient kind that sits in kitchens and fills out forms and writes the names of the dead on lines that ask for them. In the back room, Ruth moved through the drawers, card by card. The whiteness retreated from some and held on others. She learned to describe without fixing and to record without turning the record into a cage. The backpack went into a plain box on the bottom shelf, unlabeled. She tried to measure how much of her son had returned that did not ride in a bag and could not. There are measures for rain and wind, not for a life coming back into focus. Sometimes she took the bus pass out and put it back. She went to the meadow when the sky over the highway was the smoky blue of fish scale and stood with her hands on the fence and did not look down. Grass tufted the lip. Spiders made their compromises. Once in September, a breath rose from the throat of stone that could have been nothing and could have been the day exhaling. She did not forgive the well or hate it. She lived around it. Winter came. The reservoir took and lost ice. Children carved figures in snow and watched them soften. Ruth put away the lost and found box. She slept and woke and read, and sometimes paused in a paragraph, not because she had lost the thread, but because she had found it, and it led to a blue sock, or the smell of iron, or the sound of a pulley, and she would sit with that a minute and then go on. Spring arrived with a sly lift in the afternoon light. On a Thursday, Ruth went to the meadow and found the fence more certain and the ring of stone patient as a shoulder in an old coat. She laid her palm on it. It was cool. The well was only a well again. A mouth that kept its secrets. A robin worked the air. Cars passed with summer voices. Somewhere a hose hissed and someone turned it off. Back at the library, she sharpened 3 pencils and began to write the summer as lines that would never be catalogued under miracle. She wrote that thirst had taught the town its measurements. She wrote that water is never free. She wrote that memory is not a ledger but a place, and that you can flood a place or drain it or tend it, but you should not pretend it is inventory. She wrote until her hand cramped. She stood, drew a glass from the tap, drank and remembered the exact sound of a zipper with one tooth missing, refusing to meet its brother. In the afternoon, she put the pack on the shelf and closed the backroom door, leaving the hinge to squeal because some sounds you should not quiet. They remind you that doors open and close and that you can choose which. She went to the front desk and scanned the returns and smiled at 2 people and frowned at one because he owed and had owed since March and pretended surprise. And she decided not to remind him of how memory had behaved last summer, because mercy has a half-life and so does blame. On the first hot night of the next June, Ruth woke and thought she heard a sigh where stone meets water, told herself she was wrong, and went back to sleep. The cards kept their ink. Grass grew into gaps. People forgot ordinary things and remembered ordinary things. The town made a room around what had happened and walked through it every day without knocking over the furniture. This is how the story fits in the drawer, not as a miracle, not as a judgment, but as a record of a summer when a town took a gift it did not understand and returned as much of it as it could. And a woman took back what she could bear and left what she could not, which is what it means to choose.